Assalamu alaikum, everybody. And thank you for, again, Naveed and Asra for organizing this and for thinking of us. Where in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of dive right in. We've put together a presentation today on urban policy for you. By now, we know that, through this very diverse policy fellowship, you all have understood the concept of policy, and you guys have gone into a lot of depth on a lot of different and interesting topics. Today, we want to kind of introduce you to the urban realm a little bit and the challenges that policymakers and planners and various practitioners face in cities and in the management of cities and the governance of cities and in the spatial configuration of cities. So the way that we have, Asra, could you go to the next slide, please? The way that we have set the, the one before this. I'm just going to introduce myself, and Maira is back, I hope, and then Maira can introduce herself, and then we'll just do some brief housekeeping, and then we'll start. So a little bit about me. I am still searching for a professional definition, but my working definition is that I'm an urbanist and I'm a policy and development consultant. I have a bachelor's degree in growth and structure of cities from the Bryn Mawr College in the United States. I have an MSc degree in building and urban design for development, which is from the Bartlett School of Architecture at the University College of London. I've done an urban planning and design certification from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And for the last 11 to 12 years, I've been working in Pakistan. My research has always been on governance and service delivery in Pakistan. I think it's important for me to mention that I'm not a certified architect and I'm not a certified urban planner, but yet I am able to work very closely with both fields. I have immense respect for both fields, but it leaves me a little, I'm not owned by many fields in the urban industry in Pakistan. So as a result, I've worked in public sector, private sector, development sector, and academia. And I'm here to kind of answer a lot of questions on policy today that I hope we'll raise. Maira, you introduce yourself and then we'll do housekeeping.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Fair enough. As Naveed Saab already introduced, I'm Maira Khan. I don't have a degree as interesting as Sarah's. I am an architect turned urban planner. I have an architecture degree from Punjab University, Pakistan, and then I have a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia University, New York. I consider myself very fortunate that I very early on understood that urban development is not a very easy career, in a way that it's really hard to understand. Being an expert to bahut dur ki baat hai, samajh hi aa jaye to wo bahut badi baat hai. So how my career trajectory has been is that I understood that there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and in order to understand how they work, you have to be a part of that piece, every one of those pieces. So I worked with the government sector. I worked with the Urban Unit Punjab, just like Sarah, where her and we were colleagues. Then I worked briefly with the New York City Department of City Planning, where I was working on a couple of rezoning projects in Manhattan and Brooklyn. I have worked with the private sector, which is, I was briefly associated with the Philip Habib and Associates, which is an urban planning and engineering company, where I was working on actually the same zoning projects, but from a developer side of view, just to understand how the project works. Then I've worked in terms of advocacy also. I worked with social movement organizations on affordable housing policies. I worked with the Sao Paulo and Rio municipalities in Brazil. We worked on the affordable housing strategy, and I was very fortunate with the favela dwellers, with the dwellers of the slums, and with a couple of social movement organizations, including the MTST. With them in Pakistan, I've worked on the Punjab spatial strategy, worked with the urban unit, worked with the provincial government, worked with the local government. Currently, I am working as a consultant with the Asian Development Bank. I'm helping them with the Punjab Cities Governance, Punjab Cities Improvement Project. which is basically spread over 7 cities in Punjab, in North and South Punjab. And I also am working consulting intermittently with the with UNDP's urban platform as an urban development consultant. So I see my career trajectory as very scattered, but if I have to go back and do it again, I won't do it any other way, because there's no other way of understanding these stakeholders unless you've been in their shoes at some point in time. So that's just my little introduction. It became a little academic, so I guess we can jump right in. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Myra. So yeah, really the professional in today's talk is Myra, okay? And like, I'm kind of a jack of all right now. But no, jokes apart, let's just do some quick housekeeping. We want to keep this session as interactive as possible. We have two options. One option, we wanted to kind of open this to you all quickly. One option is that we go through our slides, and you all can jot down questions that you have for us meanwhile, or you can kind of maybe we can interject in the middle. I vote for the first option just because I think we'll be able to go with a lot of we'll be able to digest what all we've put together, and then we have some discussion points at the end. I do request that you all keep typing in the chat box, ideas that you all are having, thoughts that you all are having at the same time, because it gives a good repository of feedback for our presentation. And just small things like mics off and all of that, because that'll just help us cover as much as possible. Myra, is that good?
Works for me.
Okay. Next slide, please. So our topic today is urban policy, and I just want to kind of read this out quickly. This is this is basically a very honest understanding of urban policy, which is that there is no single model or version of it that is universally applicable or has a standard outcome. Urban life is complex and contextually challenging. Therefore, the pursuit and practice of urban policy differs from case to case. That said, there are some urban challenges that are being faced in this urban century, especially in the densely urbanizing cities of the global south. Now, these challenges are what can be referred to as the drivers of urban policy. Myra will take you through these in a Pakistani context in more detail, but let me kind of frame the topic today and discuss, before we delve deeper, that why should we pause and question the relevance of urban policy in the first place. So let me just set up the big urban challenges of our time that most policies, regardless of their contextual differences, need to be addressing. Next slide, please. So the growth of populations in cities is the result of two, the first crisis, the first challenge of our times is the growth of population and rapid urbanization. And the growth of population in cities is the result of two separate demographic processes that are happening. One is the rural-urban migration, and the second is the natural growth rate, meaning births and minus deaths. Now, rapid population growth presents all kinds of challenges, especially when it exceeds the fiscal capacity of the government to fund additional public infrastructure, which can be very costly, and it exceeds the absorptive capacity of the labor economy to provide jobs for the expanding workforce. This causes pressure on urban areas, which begin to expand beyond their means in terms of spatial growth, social growth, and economic growth. Next slide. And the physical and statistical growth, Myra will actually delve deeper into the statistical aspect. The physical and statistical growth of cities also occurs through the incorporation of what we call peri-urban settlements as the built-up area of the city expands and administrative boundaries are enlarged. This results in the emergence of, we can say, dysfunctional forms of urban development, which become locked in and complicated to rectify or reverse. And that's where you might have come up, heard the term bottom-up planning versus top-down planning. Now, pressure to build housing on well-located land can make it difficult for one industry and economic activity to find space in which to operate. So images like this, which I put up on the screen, are basically show how development becomes locked in because of lack of regulation. Okay, these images are important for us to visualize the problems that we are talking about today. Okay, next slide. Now, again, this is an image of Karachi's Orangi town. Unregulated urban expansion, as we were discussing, results in the growing of informal housing and economic sectors, which begin to spill over into the already struggling jurisdictions of municipalities and local service delivery departments. Now, the United Nations World Cities Report names Karachi's Orangi town, which is home to about 2.4 million people, as the largest among the 5 biggest slums in the world. Karachi has also found a place in the Economist's Intelligence Unit as one of the 10 least livable cities in the world. I will talk about livability later on, and this is important for us to think about when we think about why we need to manage our cities. Around a quarter of the world's population is living in slums, and the figure is rising every day. Slums in Pakistan are the lifeblood of the city, housing people and they house people engaged in all sorts of professions. This is where your cleaners, your drivers, your electricians, your cooks, your plumbers, your domestic workers are living. These are the people who allowed the city to function optimally for all of us. All these are these citizens, we need to question ourselves, are these citizens falling under the larger service delivery umbrella, or are they hidden and falling through the cracks in policy? Again, Maira is going to elaborate on what we call the hidden citizens in our urbanization. Next slide, please. Now, another big problem that our cities are facing is the sprawling low-income housing estates that are built on cheap, peripheral land, and these are difficult to convert into rounded settlements that have amenities and access to jobs because of their marginal locations. The marginal locations were what we were just looking at, but here, this is an image pulled from. I'm just trying to. Sorry. Yeah, this was an image that I pulled from an urban planning and policy chapter that was in the latest version of the new urban agenda by Springer. This is on a case study of Lahore. Now, this is an important image because it kind of shows to us that many of the problems our cities are facing today, such as high land and housing costs, inadequate infrastructure for public utilities, and deteriorated environmental quality, are because of the unplanned sprawl, which induces larger daily commutes, abnormally high use of single occupancy vehicles. And we need to highlight here the role of powerful land developers building kind of environmentally unsustainable low density communities. And what they have done is that they have pushed local authorities to invest more in road construction and widening. And they try to do this to ease traffic congestion without providing any consideration to the sustainable urban plans or patterns of growth. So severe traffic congestion on major urban arteries is what's adding to business costs, and it's very costly to tackle these through the tunnels that we're seeing built, the overpasses, the underpasses. And they're also ignoring the spatial pattern of growth can undermine the functioning of our cities currently. So the next slide, please, Asra. I'm just going to skip through this one thing because the next slide. Now, what all this rapid urbanization and unmanaged cities have done is that they have had profound consequences on human misery and distress as well. Now, when large numbers of people move to urban centers without any prearranged roadmap, the existing infrastructure often proves to be insufficient to support this growing number of people. As a result, what happens is that the city's economy gets disturbed. It results in conditions that can breed threats to security, governance, and they can also blur what we call the right to the city. Now, urbanization in democratic states is considered to be synonymous with development and improved living conditions, because of increased services and opportunities to citizens. However, when people are excluded from developed urban centers and instead they inhabit the underdeveloped peripheries, they are denied the economic and social benefit of urban life, which can cause violence and insecurity to ensue and can make our cities, have crime and not very livable places. Now, the upsurge in urban population and in the unplanned urban settlements like slums and Kachi Abadis has not only increased the level of poverty, but it also, like I was mentioning, has increased crime rates, violence, and other unintended social consequences that result from deprivation and poor urban management. Now, a high percentage of urban population is being provided with low quality of health and education, inadequate housing, urban mobility challenges, and deteriorating water and sanitation facilities. Now, this poverty and social insecurity is severely undermining the overall socio-economic fabric of major urban centers, creating a need for what we call immediate attention or a better urban policy. So can we go to the next slide? Now, therefore, as I mentioned, now the pursuit of urban policy remains essential, and more so essential to remember that the urban sector in Pakistan contributes to 78% of the GDP, and transforming cities through good structure and good definition through an urban policy will lead to the significant improvement in their overall economy and hence lead to poverty reduction and improved life quality of life for all. Now, a policy is needed not just to address the strains and challenges caused by the lack of planning and rapid urbanization that I've mentioned, but they rather need to understand and realize that importance and the potential of cities in Pakistan can be realized through better urban policies. There is much that can be achieved through urbanization if there are responsive and effective policies in place, supported by the adequate institutional infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. So today, one of the main reasons for this disordered and downcast urbanization in Pakistan is what I consider a bit of the mindset of the policymakers, because the mindset has been both political and bureaucratic. Historically, at the time of its creation, Pakistan has inherited what was known as an agricultural economy, and there was a very rural setup to the way that things were run. Majority of its population had roots in the villages, and hence the leadership also did not buy into this argument that, okay, cities are the economic engines of the country and they should be focused upon. The leadership was focusing primarily at taking facilities to the village instead of focusing more on urban life. So this mindset has been a major reason for the lack of a comprehensive urban policy in our cities at the national level and also at the provincial and more local level. We're just going to go into a video that was made in 2011, which was also the time when we saw the first honest attempt that was made in changing this mindset and focusing more towards our cities. The Planning Commission made the following short video, which was launched with the framework of economic growth that was published by the Planning Commission in 2011. And that has provided a major thrust towards what we call creative cities, focusing on policy, primarily on making cities commercially active with retail markets, accelerated growth, housing infrastructure, and etc. So let's just quickly watch this video, and then I'm going to wrap up this section and we'll hand it over to Maira.
Sarah, can you confirm if you see my YouTube screen or it's still the presentation?
I still see the presentation.
You have to share screen again.
आपको ऑडियो भी कनेक्ट करनी होगी असरा, जब उस पे जाएंगी आप YouTube पे.
जी सर.
Yes, we can see YouTube now.
Can you hear the audio?
Yes.
We live in a world where urbanization is expanding rapidly. Almost half of the world's population lives in cities, producing more than 80% of global GDP, and around 600 urban centers alone, generating 60% of world's GDP. People are compelled to migrate to cities for ideas and a variety of choice. According to the United Nations, Pakistan has the fastest rate of urbanization in the South Asian region. Currently, 9 cities have more than 1 million population, whereas by 2030, 15 cities are expected to have more than 1 million population. The current infrastructure is not enough to absorb the increasing population. Yet, we don't have an urban policy for the country. The government is controlling the administration of the country, and city dwellers do not have much say in the running of the country. Moreover, with the upcoming youth bulge, our cities need to be equipped with facilities that can help them excel in life.
These children have little education, little hope, but more importantly, they have little space for their community. There's no library, no community centers, no playground. These kids are not being socialized.
कम्युनिटी सेंटर्स हमने यूथ्स के लिए बनाए हैं, लेकिन ज्यादातर शादी हाल के तौर पर इस्तेमाल होते हैं.
Moreover, the excess demand for affordable buildings and houses is not being met. There is a lack of office space, due to which companies have no choice but to open their offices at home. Zoning laws are highly regulated, not catering to commercial needs.
Zoning regulations are basically the regulations which regulates the cities and govern the physical construction and other activities of the city. At present, the zoning regulations in our cities are very strict.
Deregulating the zoning laws will generate employment opportunity through an increase in affordable office space, increase in shopping malls, and openness in trade. Our cities lack city centers, which are dense, mixed-use areas consisting of residential, commercial, and office space. We can't have city centers if the government controls the most essential and expensive land within our cities. The provision of such areas is also neglected in the zoning laws and has resulted in small shopping areas in every sector. Mixed-use areas and city centers ideally contain high-rise buildings, as land prices are at a premium. Thus, tall buildings are both economically favorable and energy efficient.
Shows the significantly lower levels of carbon emissions associated with living in dense urban areas rather than in decentralized sprawling areas. The average single-family detached house uses 83% more electricity than the average urban apartment. Now, that doesn't control for income and family size, but even when you do that, as Matt Kahn and I do, we find a big difference between central cities and suburbs in carbon emissions.
Due to the horizontal expansion of housing, Pakistan accommodates about 6,000 people per square kilometer, while Dubai, due to vertical expansion, accommodates about 200,000 people per square kilometer. Observing the issues being faced in the cities of Pakistan, the Planning Commission has initiated the New Growth Framework.
In case of cities, we talk about the reforming of zoning and building regulations, which currently impede our domestic commerce. We are reaching out to all segments of the community for receiving all the feedback you can, and I urge all of you to contribute towards this feedback so that we can make the strategy as inclusive as possible.
It's time for change. Let's work together to make our cities vibrant and creative.
Okay, we can go back to the slide, Asra. Now, can everybody hear me again? Yeah. So as you can see by the urgent choice of music for that video, the Planning Commission started making a lot of noise about the urgency for a change in our policy mindset back in 2011, and subsequently in 2013. The government of Pakistan launched the Pakistan Vision 2025 that focused on smart and planned cities as important drivers of growth. And they stated that the challenge for Pakistan It was a quote that the challenge for Pakistan will be to address the existing challenges of the large urban centers while planning ahead for continued migration towards cities. Now, the vision aimed to harness the full potential of planned urbanization by adding connectivity and modern infrastructure to develop smart and green cities. The Vision 2025 sought to ensure and still seeks to ensure that Pakistan cities are digitally connected, equipped with wireless network sensors, and there is e-connectivity and all these technological elements. In the same year, the government of Punjab notified the Punjab Growth Strategy 2018, which had a major focus on comprehensive urban development, calling cities again as the engines of growth. Now, it's important here to point out that despite all these plans, strategies, and visions and frameworks, the situation of our cities across the country has not visibly improved. Neither has it institutionally improved. Rather, it has been worsening in a lot of ways. Recent crises, which we look at later in the presentation, have showcased this lack of improvement. Now, hardly a fraction of what has been planned and claimed to be achieved has actually been achieved and worked out. And this is probably owing perhaps to the fact that an integrated policy framework is still missing and lacking. So I hope these kind of issues help us frame the larger challenge that we're facing globally and also in Pakistan. Now I'm going to hand over to Maira, who's going to take us through the urbanization issues that are unique to Pakistan and give you some more statistical visuals of the urban challenges we're facing. Maira?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Maira.
If there's any lag, just let me know. Sarah's given a very well-rounded and a comprehensive understanding of how the urban development issues in Pakistan are. That makes my job a lot easier when I'm trying to take a slightly deeper dive into these issues. So I'll start with a quote from World Bank's report, Leveraging Urbanization in South Asia. It says, Pakistan's urbanization is messy and hidden. And what they say is that it is messy as the widespread existence of slums. I'm sorry, give me a second. Of slums, as there's a widespread existence of slums and sprawl. This sprawl, they say, helps give rise to urbanization on the peripheries of major cities, which is not captured by official statistics, hence the hidden part of the equation. It's also messy because the urbanization manifests itself in the form of inadequate access to housing, drinking water, sanitation services, and not to mention city streets that are gridlocked with traffic. Now, these are things that we hear about all the time. Essentially, what I'll do in my presentation is that I'll try to deconstruct this one paragraph and see how the urbanization patterns are messy and what do we mean when we say the urbanization is hidden. Sarah's already shed some light on this. I'll use some spatial data to actually help you visualize what the problem looks like. Can we have the next slide, Asra? We'll start with the hidden part of the equation. Next slide. Before we understand what hidden urbanization means, let's try to first understand what urbanization means. Urbanization, when we say Pakistan is rapidly urbanizing, there are two phenomena that we're talking about. Sarah's already mentioned that once we have a densely populated urban agglomeration, which is Lahore, Rawalpindi, Karachi, and all of these bigger cities, the population increases because of sometimes either natural growth or migration from the rural areas. In order to accommodate this increase in population, the city grows. And unfortunately, since Pakistan may higher and vertical developments ka itna concept nahi hai, the cities tend to expand horizontally. So that's where the sprawl part comes in. But there's another form of urbanization, which is very important and must not be left out. This is when existing smaller towns, rural areas over the years tend to evolve and show characteristics in terms of their built fabric, their the economic activity that prevails, the demographic structure that is more urban-like. We may not call them urban areas as such, but we can definitely call them urbanizing because they're in the transition of becoming urban, in the process of turning urban. So we need to make sure that all of these different forms of urbanization are catered for. The transition of towns from rural to urban usually happens because of two major reasons, and they're both related to locational advantage. Either a town is situated on a major corridor that connects two large areas, which is what we usually refer to as urban development. Or a lot of the times there's a town that is within commuting distance, let's say 30 to 50 minutes from a larger city. So it's easier for the people residing in that town to live in the smaller town, but commute to the city for work. Their kids go to school there, so they're technically residents of the larger city by the day, but at night they're the residents of the urbanizing towns. So these satellite towns, these urban developments, these expanding, sprawling peri-urban areas, these are all as much part of the urban fabric as the cities are, which are administratively identified by the government as urban, and they must not be left out. Failure to acknowledge them can result in multiple challenges, including shortcomings related to, like Sarah already said, municipal service delivery, economic development, infrastructure supply, and so on and so forth. Can we have the next slide? So, like I already said, a lot of the times, these various forms of urbanization are left out of the statistics that are used to develop these urban policies. To understand what the term urban policy in Pakistan means, we need to really deconstruct it. By this time, I'm sure you guys have you've attended sessions by such amazing policymakers and experts and consultants. You understand well what policy means. But what urban means is very important for you to understand. According to, unlike all of the urbanization trends that we just spoke about, according to the Pakistan's Bureau of Statistics, only the people residing in metropolitan and municipal corporations and municipal committees or cantonments are urbanized, and all the residual are rural areas, which if any of you and I, all of us who've lived in cities all of our lives, we can, just by the sound of this, we can understand that there's something wrong with this definition, because what it suggests is कि एक boundary draw हुई हुई है जिसके कदम अगर हम उस पार रखेंगे तो आप रूरल हैं और इस पार रखेंगे तो आप अर्बन हैं, ऐसा हमें पता नहीं होता. Urbanization is a very, it's a gradient. There's a denser urban core, then as you move out of that urban core, there's low density, medium density areas, then there's peri-urban areas, and then there's rural development. So this whole concept of treating either urban and everybody who lives in the residual areas are rural, it's not the right way of approaching the issue. Automatically, when your understanding of urbanization is flawed, policies that will come out will not be able to meet the problems and the needs. Next slide. What you have in front of you is an amazing effort that the Urban Unit Punjab did. These images are out of the Punjab Cities Growth Atlas, something I would encourage you to, all of you who are interested in the subject, to give it a read. What they've done is that they've used satellite imagery to map how our cities have grown in terms of their footprint. So what you see in yellow is the contiguous boundary of various cities. We have Multan, we have Rawalpindi here. That was drafted off of satellite imagery in the 1995. And then the red part is what the expansion looks like in those 20 years from 1995 to 2015. Now, take a step back and read the definition that we spoke about earlier. Administrative boundaries that have not been updated in the past 30 years. How can we assume that anybody who lives within this little red shape or form is urban and everybody outside of it is rural? The only thing that can come out of such an understanding of and that's what we're dealing with here in Pakistan. Can we have the next slide? Again, the Punjab Cities Growth Atlas suggests that in the past 2 decades, only the cumulative contiguous area of 50 of Punjab's most populous cities has increased by 190%. Just that figure can make you understand how much referring to as the hidden urban population in this presentation. Next slide. Now, these lines, I'm sorry, the next slide. These lines that you see, I don't know if you can see my cursor. I don't think you can. So as you see, for instance, Sialkot and Daska and Gujranwala and Wazirabad, the lines that connect these cities are the major corridors. And the little development that you see around here is, if you zoom in, it's very dense population. And these are all the people that we're leaving out. So in addition to the sprawled areas, built fabric that is beyond the administrative boundaries, we're also missing out on these development patterns. Next slide. This is Agoke. This is one of the examples that I can present to you for the satellite towns or the smaller rural towns that in the past 20 years have changed their character from rural to urban. Agoke is a medium density settlement in the Sialkot district. It's located only 10 kilometers, which is, according to Google Maps, a 30-minute driving distance from the MC of Sialkot, and it has a contiguous built-up area of approximately 400 acres. Next slide. It has over 45,000 residents, 6,500 households, and it has an average density of over 11,000 persons per square kilometers, which is more than what a lot of the areas that we officially identify as urban have a density. Agoke also has a railway station, it has hospitals, schools, universities, a densely populated commercial area. Over 90% of the houses are considered pakka makan according to the 1998 census. 95% of the houses have electricity, 45% have potable water. And yet, according to the census, both of 2017 and the 1998 census, this area is officially considered rural in Pakistan. All of this and many other towns collectively make the hidden population, the hidden urban population that World Bank report and so many other researchers have been speaking about. Next slide. So given that 2 decades, when you compare the statistics of 1998 and 2017 census, it suggests that Pakistan's urban population as a percentage of its total population has only increased by 2%. And this is a figure that's been disputed at multiple forums. Raza Ali's work, I would suggest that anyone who's interested should go ahead and read it. He's provided empirical evidence that in 1998, 63% of Pakistan's population was already urban or urbanizing. The World Bank Agglomeration Index suggests that back in 2009, 53% of the country's population had already become urban. And the interesting part that I'd want to highlight here is that both the Agglomeration Index and Raza Ali's work uses the 1998 census data. They use the micro data, but they have revamped the definition of urban areas in Pakistan, and they've added indicators, next slide, that are more realistic and that can actually gauge the extent to which an area is urban. For instance, the different criteria that are used to identify urban areas are its demographic structure, economic activity, location, proximity to a large urban core, built fabric, and so on and so forth. So just by changing the definition, the statistics were all of a sudden is that we need to come out of the administrative boundary wali definition that we've sketched boundaries 20 years ago, and everyone inside it is urban and everyone outside it is a rural citizen. So that mentality, that understanding of urbanism needs to change. Next slide. We need multi-criteria definitions. Then we have to understand that urbanism is not as simple as we're trying to reduce it to. We're trying to reduce it to either urban or rural. That's not the way the rest of the world is working. That's not how you make good policies that are fit for the settlement and for the citizens of the settlement. There's a higher core, then there's a peri-urban ring, then there's rural areas, there are urban clusters. These are all different forms of urbanization that need to be identified in the official definition of the government. And lastly, we need to update the administrative boundaries. And most importantly, we need to update them in a way that it is kept as evidence-based and as fair as possible, because politicizing coming up with a methodology jahan par political influence ka koi bhi margin ho sakta hai would not serve the purpose. It's just going to be another evil. Can we move forward? Next slide, please. One of the reasons why I took so much time to discuss this one problem is because I feel like it's a very good example in terms of an urban policy case study. Sarah's already said we don't have a coherent national urban policy for Pakistan, but this is a great case study. It's a great case study because there was a problem with of urbanism, of which a lot of policy-related problems were coming up. So the research community came up. They provided empirical evidence. They presented it at important forums till we came to a point where the government did not have a choice but to take an action about it. And fairly recently, in 2009, the Punjab Local Government Acts Amendment came in. And a lot of the suggestions that were provided by Raza Ali and a lot of other research programs was, I wouldn't say the entire thing, but there's a step in the right direction. So what the Punjab Local Government Act suggests is that we need to revise the limits of the settlements. But I feel like it still leaves room for, because what it doesn't do is it doesn't provide a proper toolkit as to how technically this process should be carried out. Committees banayenge, usme elected members honge, and things like that. But the point is, at some point, we have to ensure that there is an objective process associated to this, because otherwise, like I said, politicizing this process would get us nowhere. The second part that's been done well is कि जो administrative boundaries है तो उनको revise करेंगे. दूसरा, definition of urban areas has changed. Contiguity of built up area has been added as an indicator. Socioeconomic and physical characteristics have been added, but how to measure those socioeconomic and physical characteristics, uski koi toolkit abhi tak provide nahi ki gayi hai. Then we've added a population threshold, which is good. 75,000 ki population wala town will be a municipality with a municipal committee. 2.5 lakh wala will have a municipal corporation and things like that. So there's a hierarchy that we're identifying, which is good. And then one other good thing is that every 8 years there will be a revision of the administrative limits. So this is a good case study in terms of a problem on ground, the research community coming together, and then the policy landscape actually taking notice and trying to solve the problem. So that's just something that I wanted to present as a case study. Can we move on? Now let's move on to the messy part of the equation. What we have in front of us is a problem tree of Pakistan's urban development. This is something that the Asian Development Bank developed as part of its country partnership strategy back in 2015. And I feel I haven't found a more comprehensive, I'd say, problem tree for Pakistan. It identifies the most critical problems, the effects it has on our population, and the different causes that feed into the problem. Can we move to the next slide? I know this looks a little overwhelming. what I'll do with you guys is that we'll break this down and we'll try to deconstruct it. And I'll try to explain what are the problems and how is it that we can approach them in terms of a policy solution to them. The three biggest problems and the most critical problems that we're highlighting here are poor urban infrastructure, poor municipal service delivery, and unmanaged urbanization. In terms of our daily lives, it results in degraded urban environment. There's air pollution, noise pollution, there's urban flooding, there's traffic congestion, poor urban living conditions, there's poor public safety conditions, health conditions, unequal opportunities, abject urban poverty, low productivity of our cities, and so on and so forth. So let's, I won't take more time, and let's just dive into each one of these problems and the different aspects that add into these. Can we have the next slide? The first part is the one most close to my heart, and I think it would be for any urban planner. That's poor urban infrastructure and unmanaged urbanization as a result of lack of strategic planning. This is a very important aspect that we need to talk about. सबसे पहली बात तो ये है, इसके बहुत सारी वजूहात हैं. पहली वजह ये है कि we have limited institutional and technical capacities in terms of the municipal corporations or the government agencies. Either they do, usually they do not have the technical skill set to develop such strategic plans. Normally they're outsourced. कोई Chinese company आती है, कोई German company आती है, कोई joint venture करते हैं, and they come up with a very flashy master plan that's an example that we've seen in the case of Gwadar, if you guys have had the chance to see that master plan. बहुत contextually irrelevant solutions हुआ करते हैं कभी-कभी, and it's the entire exercise, hundreds and thousands of dollars go into developing those papers, and there's very little, a lot of the times there's very little value addition that these documents make. Another problem is that we don't have urban indicators, data on urban indicators. Collect कर लें तो हमारे पास technical infrastructure ऐसा नहीं होता कि हम उसको properly monitor कर off of. One of the biggest problems is the quick fix mentality. That's we tend to rely on short-term engineering solutions. That's something that we see. At times this is not ill-intentioned, I must say. Local government structure अभी तक हमारा बेचारा अपने पाँवों पे खड़ा नहीं हो सका है. हर कुछ अर्से बाद amendment आ जाती है. Currently उसको dissolve कर दिया गया है. So in a lot of the places, at least in Punjab, the DCs are actually acting as heads of municipal corporations, and we all know कि उनका transfer कितनी जल्दी होता है. A lot of the times 5 से 6 महीने में अगला DC आ जाता है. So every time one of them holds the office, they want to come up with a solution which they can see through till the end of their tenure. So easy and quick solutions is what they want to do. अगर वो कोई long term practice करेंगे, it will be मतलब वो कुछ अरसे में यतीम हो जाएगी by the time the term ends. So that's one of the problems that they're dealing with. What happens is that we have piecemeal solutions to our problems. An example for that would be the Karachi sewage treatment plant. It was built in the 90s, a multi-million-dollar project, a great engineering solution. When you look at it as in isolation, it's a great project. But when you look at it as an urban planning problem, it was a huge failure, because even though the sewage treatment plant worked very well, the sewage actually never made its way to the sewage treatment plant because there was no connection. So at the end of the day, in terms of solving a problem, it was a disastrous failure. And we all know that there's a graveyard of such useless investments that we have in our backyard. So that last mile problem is also a big issue. Then we have weaker subsector coordination. Transport data से data मांगे, department से data मांगेंगे तो वो नहीं देगा, PHA से मांगेंगे तो वो नहीं देगा. तो जो integrated planning का पूरा concept है वो वहीं fail हो जाता है. And then finally, the political interference. Agar kuch kar karke master plan ban bhi jayega, whether or not we'll adhere to it, there's no guarantee, because political interferences can very easily override these recommendations. So that's a couple of issues jinki wajah se urban infrastructure bhi hamara properly managed nahi ho sakta, build nahi ho sakta, and there's a unmanaged urbanization trend that we're dealing with. Moving on, Asra. In addition to the technical side of things, there's also a huge infrastructure financing gap. इसकी भी बहुत सारी reasons हैं. For instance, money is always an issue. We have low tax base, and we don't have enough revenue collections. For instance, the municipal corporations, firstly, they don't have the capacity to collect taxes and tariffs the way they should. This brings us back to the institutional capacities of our local governments. Asset inventories नहीं है हमारे पास. जब asset inventory नहीं होगी, उसकी for instance, Rawalpindi, there were areas that used to be residential. Now the character is changing, they're becoming more commercial. And a lot of the property owners, they haven't gotten the commercialization licenses. So even though they're paying taxes for residential property, which are a lot lower, they're using it for a commercial purpose. So that's where the government is losing out on potential revenue. Then we have lower DC rates compared to the market rate. DC rate is the government rate for a property. When the rate of the property is not according to the market value, automatically the immovable property taxes that are paid are not comparable. Then we have tariff structures. बहुत weak है. For instance, water tariffs are not based on consumption. I don't pay my water bill based on my consumption per liter. It's either based on square foot area or property type, which is honestly an unfair. Pakistan is now officially a water poor country. And our water tariffs are very primitive. We need to have smart metering to make sure that proper and fair tariffs are collected. And then there's also political unwillingness to raise tariffs because it's an unpopular decision to make. There's irregular budget allocations. We've already seen Lahore ko hamesha बेचारा पूरा पंजाब रोता रह जाता है, लाहौर को सारी फंडिंग मिल जाती है. Intermediate cities are left out. Southern Punjab is often left out. And then there's also wasteful use of financial resources. All of this together results in a huge infrastructure financing gap. I'm sorry, I know there's some, but honestly, like I said, it's messy, and bringing method to this madness isn't an easy job. Finally, let's look at the service delivery part. Sorry. This is one of the biggest issues because this goes beyond infrastructure. It's true that, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. It's true that there's lack of funds. We've already spoken about this. I won't dwell on it more, but I feel like two problems that are bigger than just funds are A, lack of will to provide a good quality service, and B, the lack of institutional capacity. Now, why I say this is that when there's no accountability, if I am the head of an MC and I'm not doing my job well, and I know that nobody will hold me accountable for it, automatically there's a lack of will for me to perform better. That's one reason. And the second reason is, and the second problem which is bigger than the deficit in terms of funds, is the lack of institutional capacity. Why I say this is because worldwide, globally, municipal service delivery is now being given to the private sector. Private sector is very efficient. They're great with collecting revenues. They're great with asset management. But because of the fact that हमारे जो MCs हैं, उनकी regulating capacity नहीं है, they can't manage contracts, they can't regulate services. It's very difficult for us to bring the private sector in. एक तो ये कि उनके पास incentive कम होता है. When I say उनके पास incentive कम होता है, that means that the private sector would only want to come in if there is a good management of the asset inventory, if they can calculate their risks. But at this point, when it comes to water supply, there's barely anyone out there in the market who'd want to be a part of this service delivery. Solid waste management में हमें PPP modalities मिलती हैं only because it's simpler, but it's also simpler because it's been made simple. क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ solid waste management को कूड़ा करकट घर से उठा के लैंडफिल साइट तक ले जाने से आगे हमने कभी सोचा ही नहीं है. हम कभी end-to-end solution के बारे में नहीं सोचते, which takes us back to the lack of strategic planning. There's an entire process. There should be segregation of waste. There should be recycling of recyclable materials, or waste to energy conversion is a very popular solution these days. And then at the end, jo non-recyclable waste hai, you take it safely to the disposal sites, or disposal or landfill sites bhi itni aasan nahi hai. You have to make sure that there are no environmental disadvantages that come along. So the reason why, to some extent, solid waste management mein private sector aa jata hai, that's because we've oversimplified it to that extent. And last but not the least, there's overlapping mandates. Kya kaam municipal corporation ne karna hai, kya kaam CDA ne karna hai, kya kaam RDA ne karna hai, iski koi clear definitions nahi hai. I'm sorry to say, jitne local government acts aa jaye, nobody has been able to honestly streamline this to the extent that this should have been. I think I've taken a lot of the time. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Maira. I was using Maira's lecture earlier when we were compiling our presentation, and right now when she was presenting it, to refresh all the things that I had forgotten about urban planning and policy in Pakistan. So Maira, thank you for that comprehensive overview.
Sorry, I know it got very dry, but like I said,
not at all.
It's not easy.
Not at all. So how are we again on time? Okay, great. Now, what we wanted to kind of look at once we wrapped up, with what the problems are, what areas we can, what we need to concentrate on. I wanted to just focus quickly on the public realm in cities and how that is suffering due to the lack of urban policy functioning in the country. Now, on the screen in front of you, you're seeing this kind of diagram by the World Bank, which shows the importance of public spaces in terms of creating environmental value for cities, social value for cities, and the economic value for cities. So due to the various challenges highlighted so far, the quality of the public realm has begun to suffer greatly in our cities. Now, if public spaces are mismanaged, scarce, and underutilized, then the livability of the city also gets affected. Rather than being sites of development, democratization, and opportunity, Pakistani cities are now becoming hubs for inequality, disparity, and they're unlivable for many people, particularly because private economic interests have begun to outweigh what is considered the public good at large. So access to public spaces for citizens, especially the lower class, if you will, or the marginalized class, marginalized citizens of the city, is under threat due to this increased kind of high density development. When I say high density development in this case, I mean this push for developing our city, urban development. But what it does is that it displaces the existing public spaces and recreational spaces that are so important for citizens to be able to access. Here is a recent reminder when we had the lockdowns in 2020 because of COVID-19, you saw the importance of public space all of a sudden and the lack of access to it. I don't know how many of you were able to see this, but the ring roads around our cities were suddenly populated by those living in the Kachi Abadis that lined our ring roads. And this was literally because people were locked up in their houses and they had no places to go to. And it really highlighted the issue of the public realm in our, for those planning and developing our cities. Now, public spaces such as recreational areas, green spaces, public sidewalks, community centers, and buildings play an important part in improving productivity and health of urban residents. And this encourages kind of, not only social inclusion, but also a spatial inclusion. And I'm a big proponent for I like giving this example. The public realm isn't just these places of recreation and green space. Public realm is also places that are shared in our cities. So for example, public transport. If public transport is shared by everybody, it is a space where you every morning or every evening, whenever you're on public transport, you can rub shoulders with people of various income backgrounds, various walks of life, and you develop a more integrated city with more tolerance and more acceptance of one another. Now, in many ways, a city's ability to deliver and create these spaces and these experiences reflects its degree of livability. And with our kind of, mismanagement from a governance level, from a policy level, from all of that, we've not been able to have what we can say a robust public realm. And that has really, created a bad taste when it comes to our ranking and in livability status as an urbanized country. So what I wanted to basically highlight here was that the public realm and urban space development in Pakistan is still really, really lacking. And especially when we look at it from the government end, there have been very amazing examples and resistance from citizen-led initiatives, which we can talk about later, that have kind of tried to address this need in terms of reclaiming space and reclaiming their city, but they're still few and far in between. There was an analysis between 2001 and 2013 that revealed that green areas, urban green areas in Pakistan have declined as a proportion of the larger urban footprint. From 4.6%, which is 27 square kilometers, to 3.7%, which is 30 square kilometers. Now, that's a huge reduction in urban green space that has taken place in our cities. And that's really something that we need to be thinking about as we go forward in terms of developing our policies and, sticking to a policy. We need to focus on the public realm. Switching gears a little bit from the public realm and going back to something that was being discussed in our site chat, I wanted to kind of just talk about how urban crises and recent challenges have again highlighted the lack of integrated policy and governance in our cities. Asra, could you go to the next slide, please? Now, on the top right of this screen is an image that found its way on many newspapers and television networks over the last summer during their coverage of Karachi's terrible urban flooding. We see here an elderly citizen kind of wading through knee-deep water through a major transport thoroughfare in Karachi, and he appears to be having a bag of groceries in his hands. Now, sometimes, I mean, I was saying this earlier, images, a picture can speak 1,000 words, and therein lies, those that are existing at the outside the city in terms of service delivery, and those that are most harshly affected by the crises that come up. Now, Karachi is a good case study for us to look at. It's our largest city. It's the largest contributor to the national economy, and yet Karachi, due to our failure of policy and governance, is at a high risk of natural and man-made disasters, and is one of the most disaster vulnerable districts even in Pakistan. Various authorities responsible for disaster relief suffer from weak coordination. They suffer from lack of information gaps, low capacity, and limited planning. Now, emergency response is hindered by poor land use planning and building control. Regular flooding occurs in Karachi during the annual monsoon season, and it is getting worse and worse because of poorly maintained and clogged drainage systems. Now, all of this really kind of came to what I would hope, it came to a head this last summer, because we had this pandemic raining down on us, and then we had literally the skies raining down on Karachi, and a lot of displacement. So, Karachi basically became very clear in its lack of coordinated city management. Decision makers are clearly removed and uninformed about the needs of the communities. The income and livelihood disparity in Karachi is growing daily. Marginalized communities are lacking access to already mediocre basic services and amenities. And there is a severe lack of public health consideration in urban planning and urban decision making. Politics and blame shifting keep taking over what is the actual problem. So, Karachi is not new to these governance challenges and repeated neglect. What we basically are looking at is a lack of ownership that Karachi suffers from. There isn't a singular authority or group that rises to the challenge of managing, planning, designing, and delivering services to Karachi. There are various groups that are at play, and then those various groups are not coordinating amongst themselves. So the provincial government then ends up retaining substantial control over various city services and functions, such as master planning, building control, water and sewerage, solid waste management, and development of the peri-urban and peripheral lands. Local governments are unfortunately extremely weak in terms of their financial position, and they're relying solely on transfers from the provincial government to meet their needs, of which a majority is spent on salaries and pensions, and leaving very little for maintenance and development of infrastructure and actually addressing the needs of the citizens. So, when crises like these happen, when the turn of the century for us saw heightened security threats for our urban everyday life. Then we saw we continue to see a lot of electricity issues. We see water shortage. We see climate related issues like urban flooding. Karachi also suffered from a terrible heat wave back in 2015. There's been a lot of kind of upsurge in conversations about Pakistan's urban readiness to meet the challenges that it's facing, and that readiness needs to be seen in its policy frameworks that it's developing. Professionals like Maira, urbanists like myself, professionals like Dr. Naveed, a lot of us are working towards highlighting the issues for the government and for policy and decision makers. And, we can put together a lot of data, but we need a political will to form those policies that are eventually going to address all these issues. Can we go to the next slide? So, in doing all of this, I think we can open it up to discussion points. One of the main, these were some of the discussion points that Maira and I felt were important to kind of, have up on the screen as we close today. But I also wanted to just add in here the discussion on the definition of urban. As Maira was speaking, Maira, I don't know if you were able to catch up on the chat. Your slides were making everybody kind of question, the concept of urban, what's rural. Then, Fatma was rightly pointing out that Punjab seems to be having more of this peri-urban phenomenon, and other provinces don't. So, I mean, that's something definitely that we need to think about as we go towards urban policy, when we don't even know what urban is. And there are so many people, as Maira pointed out, that are hidden from the urban's definition. Then, the challenge is great. So, just some discussion points out here. Asra, how do you suggest we do that? Should we go through these ourselves, or should we let people jump in and ask questions?
I suggest letting people ask questions.
Okay.
So the floor is open for questions, guys. As always, raise your hand or just jump in and ask away.
I see Samna has shared a link. I'm going to check that link out later. Thank you.
Fatma, go ahead.
Thank you for recognizing me, Asra. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Maira, for your presentation. It was a very thought-provoking discussion. So the discussion that we were kind of having on the chat, if I could just succinctly bring it down to just one question, it would be that why, despite its sport, despite perhaps the largest exodus of laborers migrating from all parts of the country into Sindh, we don't see the kind of urbanization that we should. And for the longest time, I blamed the governance there. But again, my very limited understanding of urbanity is that it's like a monster. It expands. When you have economic opportunities, your cities expand. You have multiple cities. And then again, capitalists, they go everywhere. Khadi definitely wants to open a store in Thar City. So why do we not see that in Sindh? What is stopping Sindh from, and here I only talk about Sindh and not the other two provinces, because it really genuinely escapes me. It does have a high population density as well. So I think Ahmed Saab was mentioning, talking about a population density that traditionally Punjab had. So over to you guys.
Myra, I'm going to attempt it, okay? And then you add to this. Fatma, it's a really good thing to be wondering, about Sindh's very clear difference when it comes to Punjab. I just wanted to add something, as you were saying that, like urbanity is a monster. Now, given that it's my livelihood and my absolute passion, I don't think that it's a monster. I think when we mismanage it, it is monstrous in its ability to be unequal to certain populations. Otherwise, if it's managed properly, it is an absolutely great opportunity, and a great advantage. In the popular media, New York City is often referred to, as the gateway to the United States, the land of opportunity, etc., etc. So, you can say that it's a monster for some, but for the majority, it's not, But going to your actual question, for me, I think the answer literally lies in the disproportionate financing of the provinces. Okay. I know Ahmed Iqbal is on this, is nice enough to join us today, so Ahmed can jump in and say what he knows a lot more about this than I do. He'd be able to add greatly to this. I think there's been a disproportionate funding, which is why Sindh remains, I feel delightfully rural, because we do need a thriving rural sector. But what we do not need are the humanitarian inequalities that we see in the province. So I think the issue is is at the center in terms of the federal government.
Right.
Myra, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Sarah. By the way, when I said monster before, Myra gives her input as well, I really meant like a djinn, something that spreads. I don't mean the Leviathan. I'm true blue, lover of all things urban by heart. But it's something that spreads. It's supposed to, it's a phenomena, it's a movement, it's an experience. It just goes around. I don't know why in Sindh, but thank you. Delightfully rural is a good phrase, I suppose. Really enjoyed that.
To that, or should I take the next question?
I'm sorry I got disconnected. I'm not sure I missed Sarah's response. If there's need for further clarification, I'm not sure what points she's made. So I can, realistically speaking, my research has always been more on Punjab than Sindh. But that's a very great question, and the one of the couple of things that come to mind is, first, there's disproportionate funding. I feel connectivity, regional connectivity, plays a very important part. Punjab is very well connected. That's one of the things that always gives it advantage, and that's one of the things why it's so easy. The spillover effects I feel are so much easier. And yes, I'm not sure honestly what other reasons could have been. And I also feel like there's a dearth of research
I think
in terms
Myra
of
got disconnected.
urban
But we have more
Punjab.
hands, Asra. So there's Hera and there's Manahil.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Maira was still talking. Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. I think I don't have much to add to the subject, but I do feel that there's a dearth of research on this subject, and it's definitely a very thought-provoking question. I'm sorry, I keep getting disconnected.
No, no, it's okay. Thank you,
Thank you,
Maira.
Maira.
Manahil, you can ask your question.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, Sarah and Myra. So I want to say that the current state of urban planning in our which is in shambles, is due to the lack of integrated policy framework. What I got from the presentation. So from your experience, you mentioned that this is a question for both of you. So you mentioned that you worked in different multiple sectors. So ideally, who do you think are the key policy actors or the key actors of the society that should come forward to develop a coherent urban policy for our cities in Pakistan? And how can we bring all these actors on one page, on one level, in order to develop a coherent policy? Because in Karachi, for example, as you mentioned, Sarah, that there are so many authorities and the overlap in their functions. You don't even know as a layman whose responsibility was in the first place. So if you could please shed light on that.
Sarah, do you want to take this one, or should I?
Yeah, on eggshells, I'm going to try and take it. It's a huge question. Kind of proud that Myra in my presentation has been able to raise this question. So thank you for asking it, I believe, Manahil, right? And
Yes.
here's an attempt at answering it. The last part, especially, which is, how do we bring these different actors or stakeholders onto one page? And then what do we do with the fact that the layman, which is the citizen, they don't even know whose responsibility certain things are? I think therein is where we can start in terms of a solution, which is stakeholder mapping. And what is a matrix of our city and how it's run. That does not comprehensively exist for any city in Pakistan. I took the naive task of trying to develop one for Lahore when I was working at the urban unit. I thought, okay, I'm going to make a city matrix for Lahore. And honestly, it was so difficult to do it, despite me having all the provincial resources at hand. But it wasn't easy to do. We don't what department fell under which department was taking orders from what department, and it was just a mess. A lot of people can say that technically it's very simple. Oh no, this happens, that happens, but that knowledge realistically lies only with the bureaucracy. And as you said, the layman does not know it. In many cases, us professionals don't even know these things unless there is a serious interest and research into mapping this issue. Then earlier on, you asked if I think the other part of your question was who are the actors that should come together in terms of building these things. I think the answer to that, from my opinion, is that you need politicians, bureaucrats, members of the urban planning community, which include urban planners, they include architects, they include interdisciplinary urban practitioners like myself, that can kind of give you the anthropological setup of cities, and need to speak to demographic challenges and growth and growth challenges that cities need to project and think for. It also needs to include representatives from the citizenry, and we need to make sure that different age groups are reflected. For me personally, in Pakistan, whatever urban policy we go towards, the youth has to be a massive part of it, because our population, I'm forgetting the number, if anybody has it, Pakistan has one of the largest young populations. So essentially these policies are being made for young people, so they need to be a part of it in some way and form. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how we get everybody on the same page, political will can do that. a government that is serious about putting a policy together will find a way to get it done. Political will is my opinion, the beginning to that solution. Maira?
Sarah's answered it very well, so I won't repeat any of that. The only point that I'd want to raise is that when we say we need integrated planning, it sounds a lot easier than what it actually is. Besides the overlap in mandates, besides the fact that it's a difficult task to actually just map the set of responsibilities that different departments have. There's also, in addition to the problem is that every department has a policy of its own. For instance, if you talk to the transportation department's head, he will give you a very different vision for the transportation. This is something that this is a meeting I was sitting in 2 days ago, and the transportation department's head was presenting what their vision for the transport sector for the next 10 years is. And very unfortunately, some of the sections that they were talking about had a major clash with the national electric vehicle policy that the Ministry of Climate Change had basically passed, I think in November 2020. So I think this entire exercise goes beyond developing one coherent, integrated plan. जो policy conflicts आते हैं हमारे, that goes beyond just the provincial government. हमारे federal government के departments के साथ भी clashes आ जाते हैं. So like I said, it's a much easier task when you talk about it. It's a lot difficult to do because trust me when I say I don't think there's ever a perfect integrated plan that anybody can develop, because governance is a lot harder than what we think. The only thing we can do is we can strive to have more discussion, more dialogue, more transparency, more connection and collaboration between departments. And honestly, we also need to look beyond the tiers of local government, provincial government, and federal government. Within these 3 tiers, there's also a lot of the times no connection. So it's more than just urban planning. It's a lot of this has to be dealt with at the federal level.
Thank you both Maira and Sarah for answering that so thoroughly. Hira, you can ask your question.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Maria, for your presentation. It was totally astonished, and I think I'm amazed. I would suggest Dr. Naveed to give us like 10 days training on urban management, because this is something I really, really enjoyed, and I really wanted to work for that. So most of the questions were asked by Fatima and Manal were missing, but I just wanted to know what are the push and pull factors of urbanization that main 2 factors that you think that we really wanted to work. And the second question that associate with that, why do you think that government is lacking in addressing the issues of development and the urbanization in the country? Because there is a vast population, and we can see in 20 years we can be floating in the water, might be possibilities. So what do you think that how can we address that, and what are the lacking that government is making, and we can have quick solutions to that? Thank you.
Again, great question.
Sarah, I'm sorry, since we're short of time, can we divide answers? You can answer one of them and I can answer the other one. I just saw the time.
Okay. Yeah. Can I answer? Oh, I don't know if okay, it's just really quick. Thank you for asking such a difficult question towards the end. The quick answer to this is the push and pull factor for me that's really important for the governments to address. The pull factor to cities is the fact that there aren't an access to good healthcare and education outside the cities. Okay, this is one of the main issues that the government needs to address, which is, nationally speaking, provision of healthcare and provision of education, and strengthening livelihoods that exist outside the urban sector. Okay, so these are things that the government can address. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that the government needs to, or just generally, we need to look at how we are using our land, what our land use policies are, how we're zoning, how we're building in terms of density. That is one way to address these population challenges and the increase of cities. We need to start going vertical. And yeah, this is a really long answer, but that's a really brief thing to it. Maira, you can add to it.
I'll take the second part of the question. Unfortunately, you said that a quick solution, like I already mentioned, there's no quick solution to any of this. But I think what we need to do is that we need to keep an eye out for the climate change aspects. We've currently seen that, for instance, Lahore ki example mein, smog was a relatively recent phenomenon that's changed the the way we look at things. Urban development may the interesting part is that the monsters will keep changing as the time moves on. But I feel like currently the most important part, like you said, the occurrence of natural disasters has really increased over the past couple of years. How do we prepare ourselves for these disasters? And very unfortunately, हमारी तो day-to-day municipal service delivery ही इतनी poor है when it comes to emergency management. We're not prepared enough. So we need to work on emergency management and preparedness.
Thank you, Maira. Here, I hope that answers your question. So let's take the final question from Seher.
Yes, thank you.
Actually, I got disconnected for a while, so I don't know whether you've covered this in your presentation or not. I wanted to ask about financing of urban development. Like, what do you think is the best way of financing? Because, we have very limited fiscal space in our budget and we cannot, we have priorities set in our budget for spending. So do you suggest municipal bonds, or what do you suggest as a way of financing all this?
I do feel that some part of it has already been answered in some of my slides. Sarah, would you want to say more on this?
Just quickly, again, great question. I think the answer lies in decentralization of funding in the first place, and giving cities the municipal autonomy that they need to be able to develop for the context that is important to them. That said, how we go towards municipal autonomy, there are a lot of models and a lot of research needs to be done to find the model that would be beneficial for Pakistani cities. But basically, I feel municipal autonomy is the way to fund sustainable urban development in the future for Pakistan.
And very quickly, I'd like to say that while that is one of the most important parts, obviously we need to devolve power, we need to empower our local government structure. We also need to bring the private sector in. Like I already said, globally, public service delivery is something that private sector is doing wonders with. There's concepts of incentive zoning, a lot of concepts that we wanted to talk about, but due to the lack of time, we couldn't in our presentation. But PPP modality को public service provision में, municipal service delivery में explore करने की ज़रूरत है. Just like we have NEPRA, energy sector में, we need a strong regulating body for municipal service delivery and see how we can engage them, the private sector, in terms of efficient service delivery.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Maira, for very thoroughly going through your presentation and answering our questions. You've actually inspired a few of our fellows to pursue a career in urban policy and design.
Good luck.
Oh, by the way, I know Sarah, just a heads up, I know Sarah already told you that she doesn't have a certification in urban planning. Even I don't, besides a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia University. May sound fancy, but I don't want to discourage any of you. But if anybody's thinking of getting into this field, do talk to one of us, just so you get a heads up on what kind of challenges you'll get to face. But trust me, it's a very fulfilling career to have in some ways. Absolutely. And frustrating in others. So
yeah, and I think Maira and I agree with Maira. We can draw in on the lessons that we've had over the last few years. I mean, I finished my bachelor's 12 years ago, and then I quickly just straight went for my master's, and a lot has changed from when I was a student, and then all through the years that I've been a practitioner, a lot has changed. So I would suggest certain things to keep in mind when you all are going, and maybe a certain specialization, etc. So happy to take questions, and I shared my email and my Twitter handle, so wherever you all feel comfortable. Asra, again, thank you so much for having us and for organizing it, and thank you to everybody for listening in today.